Hey, welcome everyone, and thanks for watching today's conversation, LGBTQ Liberation, Pride, Solidarity and Socialism, which is a part of Arise's online festival of left ideas. I'm Amy Smith from Arise Festival, and today we're talking about LGBTQ activism, building coalitions and finding common purpose across the labour movement. We've got a focus on lessons that we can learn from lesbians and gays support the minors. They're a group who are a stalwart of the queer rights and labour movement here in the UK, and who will be familiar to anyone who's seen the excellent movie Pride. LGSM were at the forefront of providing solidarity to striking miners throughout the 1984 and 85 strike. The NUM then led the 1985 Pride March and moved the motion supporting LGBT rights at Labour's conference in the same year. We'll be discussing what we can learn from that experience, the importance of Pride, and why solidarity and socialism must be at the heart of fighting for LGBTQ liberation. So joining me today are Mike Jackson, who is the co-founder of LGSM, and Katherine Harlow. Katherine is an activist in Young Labour who've got their elections coming up soon, and she's standing to be the LGBTQ officer of Young Labour on the Socialist future slate. So hi, both of you.
Hi.
Hi. Let's get into the questions. We've just had Pride Month, and we've also had London's annual Pride March. Now, there's often a debate around what Pride is. Is it still a protest or is it just a parade? So can I ask what Pride means to both of you, and why is Pride important, or even is it still important? So Mike, we'll come to you first on that.
Okay. I mean, as much as I dislike the awful commercialism of Pride in London, all Prides still, nevertheless, are incredibly important for two reasons. One, the presence in the communities of a large, assembly of LGBT plus people, out and proud and joyous. And of course, from an individual point of view, every Pride March that there's ever been and ever will be, there will always be people on that march, LGBT plus people who have never been on that march before. And everybody knows who's been through this. It is the most affirmative experience. It changes your life, essentially. Basically, if you're just coming out of a closet where you've been scared and frightened of kind of coming out to people, suddenly to be surrounded by hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of other people is just a transcendence experience. So yeah, I think they're still important. The big change that I've seen since that famous 1985 Pride March, which the miners led, was has been the springing up of Pride marches all over Britain. And that's really significant as well. It was always just held in that London, walking down Park Lane and along Piccadilly past the Ritz. Do you know what I mean? It didn't have any impact on Londoners at all in that respect. Whereas to get Pride marches in Doncaster or wherever, that's in the heart of the community, and that will also kind of affect that change there. It's no longer something that happens in that London, it's happening in your own communities, and that's another incredibly positive development historically. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, it's about that visibility. And Katherine, what do you think?
I mean, I completely agree with Mike. It's amazing that we've now got all these different Pride marches popping up in different towns and cities, not just, the big cities like London, Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, wherever in the world. So I think it's really, really important that, those communities do have those marches and stuff, because LGBT people exist everywhere. They're not just in the big cities. So I think it is really important, and it shows people that there's something in their local community for them, if that makes sense, that they have a group around them. So I think that's really nice. In terms of what it means, I think, possibly controversial opinion, I think maybe you could argue that Pride has potentially lost a bit of its meaning in terms of the marches and stuff, because we're not really taught about the history of LGBT struggles in schools and stuff. I know I wasn't, whether the generation that follows me, or the generation after that it would be lovely, because I think it's important that we learn about the history of the struggles that LGBT people had to go through, because it is history at the end of the day. It happened. And if you think about it, 1985, it's not that long ago, really. We learn about stuff further back, so why shouldn't we learn about the importance of that event and the events that followed it? So I think you could argue that it's definitely lost its meaning, because, when I first went to a Pride March, I would have been maybe 14, and I didn't know really the symbolism of it and the importance of it. My friends dragged me along because we were like, oh, it's this really cool march. We're going to go through city centre in Nottingham, and we're going to dress up and everything. We're going to wear like all these feather boas and stuff. And I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Me, no idea what the symbolism and the importance of it was, because I was newly out and I hadn't really looked into it too much. And obviously I wasn't taught about it. So I just thought, it's going to be a nice day. Me and my friends are going to have a nice time in the sun in July. And we're going to, we're going to dance in the middle of Nottingham city centre. But obviously that's not what Pride is. It's the history of the struggles that LGBT people had to go through. And granted, it's lovely to be able to have a day where you feel like you can just go and enjoy that, but it's important to remember how we got to that point, because it was a lot of fighting to be able to feel like we could have those relaxing days, because as I said, it wasn't a relaxing day to start off with, was it? It was a riot, it was a struggle. And it's important that we really look into the deeper meaning of what kick-started it all.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Katherine. And what you just said there about education really rings true with me. When I used to deliver a lecture on Pride and LGBT rights to first-year undergraduates a couple of years ago, that was often the first time that they'd encountered any sort of teaching of that type of history. So I think you're absolutely right about the element of Pride, delivering that a bit of the political education around it. Now, one of the things that I mentioned at my opening spiel was about how the NUM famously led that 1985 Pride March. And if you've seen the film Pride, which I think obviously Mike is really familiar with, and Katherine, I think you've seen it too quite recently. I think that's quite an uplifting scene at the end, isn't it? And it's quite a joyous moment. So what can we actually learn though from that relationship that was constructed between LGSM and the miners and the NUM during the strike in the 1980s? Are there any lessons for our organisation today?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Well, it's all about solidarity, isn't it? That's what we were doing. And right now, we've got the RMT on strike, and I can see all the kind of blood dripping from the jaws of the right-wing media and the Tory party. Mick Lynch has been interviewed on television, and they're saying they're trying to provoke him about the picket lines, and I'm sure what they're wanting to say, but they haven't actually got the guts to say it yet, is, well, it'll be just like the miners' strike, all this violence on picket lines. And do you know what would be good for him to say? Yeah, we're really concerned about violence on picket lines. That's why we're calling for a public inquiry into Orgreave and the policing of the miners' strike, because that was the police violence that happened at Orgreave that day, and we want them called to account. But strangely enough, the Tory governments, successive Tory governments, won't allow a public inquiry into Orgreave. Why not? Why not? What is it? Have they got something to hide, perhaps? So yeah, I mean, standing by people in solidarity is just such an important thing to do. It's the best feeling in the world. It really is.
Yeah, I agree personally with Mike. It is about building solidarity, and I think it's about building relationships. How the lesbians and gays came and supported the miners. I think it's important that other organisations that share a common goal or that are working towards a similar thing try and build relationships with each other, whether you happen to be from the LGBTQ plus community or whether you happen to be a member of a union, for example, RMT, or another one like the UCU. I think it's really important that we build those bridges and connect with each other, which I think is a great thing that the miners' strike and the LGSM group really, you know, affected me personally. I think that's a big thing with me and my friends that, you know, have similar political views. The fact that that kind of inspired us in order to show solidarity with groups that, you know, are really struggling, especially with, you know, the cost of living crisis and the inflation and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's really important that we connect. And, you know, we did it all those years ago. We can do it again, and we should be doing it again. You know, we should be showing support for those who are struggling, you know, because people are going through a tough time. And I think it's really important that we do build on that and keep going. You know, we keep fighting and taking it to the man and to the people who are, you know, oppressing those groups and those people. So yeah.
If I could just add to that, Catherine, you know, it's about taking down the kind of barriers, taking down the walls between us. I mean, when I look back at LGSM, we were a very male-dominated group and a very white group, you know, and that's, you know, that's just history, I'm afraid. And you know, it was L and G. There was barely any B and no T whatsoever. 37 years later, that's changed radically, and for the good, of course. And you know, what's really exciting for me about the younger generation of activists, that they are so much more naturally thoughtful and inclusive of other people than we ever were. And you know, that's what's needed. That's what's needed. We shouldn't just be an LGBT plus community, but we would need to expand outwards and embrace everybody. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, that is how we're going to win the fight. The fight for socialism is when we've broken down all our barriers and we act as one voice and as one people against one enemy, which at the moment is the British Conservative Party and has been in my lifetime, all my life. That's the only enemy I've ever had. And the friends, of course, in the media, etc. And that's what we aim for. And that's the thing that they fear most, is if we continually keep uniting with each other, all kinds of disparate groups coming together and uniting, then we become a force that's you know, going to win. It's as simple as that. And that's why it's so important for the right-wing media to keep stoking up division and differences. Yeah.
We are seeing, obviously, with the RMT strikes recently, how powerful the media can be in attempting to really stoke up those divisions between the working class and the different groups that make up the working class. So what practically can we do as socialists, as LGBT socialists, to overcome those divisions and form those strong coalitions and the bonds of solidarity with other groups to form a more cohesive labour movement? Catherine, I'll come to you on that.
I feel I'm just going to repeat what Mike said. You know, work past the barriers. Excuse me. Work past the barriers that divide us. I guess nothing really divides us. Like Mike has said, it's just, you know, a bunch of press that, you know, we've been told, though, this separates you and this separates you, but really most of us have a common goal, and I think that's what we need to work on and we'll work towards. We need to sort of go, right, we share these common things and go, well, we're going to work together in order to fight for socialism and, you know, group together. It's like Mike said, it's about breaking down barriers and stuff and working on not what divides us but what unites us, because we as a group are stronger united than we are divided. You know, it's people power at the end of the day. So I think that's a big thing in terms of building coalitions and the fight for socialism and stuff, and really taking it to the enemy, who, as Mike rightly said, currently in this country is the British Conservative Party and the right-wing press. So yeah, I think it is about looking towards a common goal and what we all have, you know, what we all desire, that, you know, that is a similar thing that we can achieve together, whether that's in a community in Birmingham, a community in a tiny village in South Derbyshire, for example, or in a big city, again, like Birmingham or London, literally wherever. It's just about building those relationships with people that share a common goal, for me anyway.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, we have to keep educating people, and we have to be very patient with that as well. And as socialists, the centre of our politics is the identity of class. That, for me, that overrides everything. And you know, that's an all-embracing thing. The class, that includes all kinds of different people. And so we'll always be on a kind of learning curve of getting to understand other people in that class who live very different lives to ourselves. But that's a joyous thing. That's a you know, a very pleasant thing to do, is to get to know other people from different backgrounds, different cultures, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Katherine, I've just thought of got another question off back of what you're saying, because you are standing in the Young Labour election soon. And you said in your candidate statement on the website that the precedent that LGSM set has influenced your own politics. And I was wondering if you could talk about, you know, how has that influenced what your priorities are for that role in Young Labour following the elections, and how you can use those lessons from LGSM to shape your campaigns?
That's a great question. I think I've spoken a little bit about in terms of organising and, you know, building communities and stuff. But as Mike said, education's a big one. You know, the LGSM movement taught us a lot, you know, about taking a fight and stuff, you know, to the enemy. And I feel like I'm just kind of repeating myself again. It taught me about building relationships with people and getting to know others, and then organising with them in terms of looking at policy, whether that's on education with LGBT rights, or whether it's about building groups in a local region, for example, back home in Nottingham for me. So I think that is the main thing that the LGSM movement taught me, but especially with the education, about teaching people, the history of LGBT rights, and also about how we advance with that fight, if this makes any sense, because we're not fully there yet, obviously, and there's rampant transphobia, especially in British politics and the media, especially. Like, I go through social media every day just to see what's on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, and the amount of transphobic or non-binary phobic, if that's a term, I don't know, tweets that I see, or articles that I see, is just appalling. And I think, granted, a lot of it is blatant, you know, ignorance, but I think also you can attribute quite a bit of it to perhaps misinformation. I was talking to someone about this the other day, actually, in saying that not everyone who is discriminatory towards any community is necessarily ignorant. I think a lot of it is down to press and stuff, and the misinformation that we receive through media and government sources. So I think it's a big thing to educate people on. If they say something, take the time, and we as LGBT people, or whatever background you come from, it's not down to us necessarily to educate somebody why they're being discriminatory towards a certain group. However, I think it does help, I think, certain people if you do take the time to sort of explain what they've said and why they've, you know, caused harm, or, you know, or why they've said a negative comment, because, as I said, not always is it necessarily meant to be harmful. because I'm sure in a past time I've accidentally said something that is, you know, harmful without meaning it or without realizing it. And unfortunately for me, I think that comes from a parental thing, because both my parents are old and obviously were sort of raised in the fact that, you know, their parents were ignorant because it was just a product of their time. So I think the education thing is a big one. You know, we take time to sort of explain why somebody that said something is harmful, and then if they don't, you know, correct themselves, you know, it's on them. And then, you know, I think as long as we sort of take the time to sort of explain on a first-hand basis or a first-time basis, this is what's wrong and this is why it's harmful, I think that goes a long way, and that builds the movement necessarily, maybe, because then it gets people on board. They sort of learn and then they want to carry on learning, and they go, right, well, my friend told me this and such and such. I mean, I had a similar experience with people educating me about certain groups or whatever, and it's made me want to learn more about that. So I know that I don't accidentally offend someone, if that makes any sense. I feel like I've just rambled. But yeah, that for me is just the education and, you know, stuff like that, and building groups, to summarize anyway.
Yeah. I agree, Katherine. There is, though, I think there is an element, though, that are actually quite malicious and deliberately so.
Yeah.
Owen Jones believes that the anti-trans movement is partially receiving funding from the very wealthy American evangelical right, for example.
Yeah.
And those people are there very, very deliberately creating this mayhem and havoc. And it's part of the whole so-called culture war thing that's going on, which that's the downside to social media. That stuff can spread so very, very quickly, and it's up to us to kind of try and intercept that and you know, fight it wherever we see it. But I don't believe the majority of people who are anti-trans are those malicious people. I think the majority, as you said quite rightly, are just misinformed people who don't really understand the complexity of it. And like anything else, I think given an opportunity in a calm fashion to explain it, then people's minds can be changed. I mean, that's exactly, in a sense, what happened with us 38 years ago with the miners. You know, they realized when we approached them, but they didn't actually know us at that stage. They realized that they were being demonized. They saw it every day of their lives on the television news and stuff like that. And they just quickly came to the conclusion, well, maybe all this stuff we've heard about gay people is actually a lot of nonsense as well. And so the first thing that they did when they met us was to ask us, because you get it from the horse's mouth, do you know what I mean? And just going back to the RMT strike and picket lines and so forth, speak to striking trade unions, speak to people who've gone on picket lines, and make your own judgments whether or not they are the mob, violent or whatever. Yeah. And you'll find out they're not. They're just people who are defending in the miners' strike, their rights to a job, and with the RMT defending their pay, their conditions, and their pensions, which are all being threatened by the British Conservative Party again.
You make an interesting point, in terms of like groups receiving, you know, funding and backing from other countries and stuff, with like the whole evangelical stuff. Obviously over here with LGBT Alliance, I mean, they're a charity. They're literally described as a charity on the government website. And I mean, their tweets and their beliefs are absolutely horrific with the, you know, whole anti-trans thing. And now on social media, you see that it's not just anti-trans. They've recently taken up an anti, you know, bisexual status. They've been tweeting stuff about, you know, how bisexual women or bisexual men are either gay or straight imposters. And it's like, but there isn't just gay or straight, you know, bisexual does exist, like it is a thing. And I think they're really showing their true colours now. So You know, there is, like we say, a lot of misinformation, but then there is the general actual, this is just blatant hatred. And I think absolutely Mike is completely right about, we need to intercept it where we see it, you know.
Yeah, I didn't realise that, Catherine, about the bisexuals. Right, okay, well, that's very interesting. Well, that doesn't surprise me. That exposes really what they're about, you know. I mean, it's never ever been part of LGBT history to exclude people. It's completely the opposite. It's always been a supportive, and I mentioned this word right at the beginning, affirmative movement. That's exactly what it's about. So for these new kids on the block to come along and start kicking around, it makes me extremely suspicious about who's behind them and what they are. Yes, there are people who have got genuine beliefs on either side, but I think there's something much darker than that underneath it all.
Thanks both, really interesting answers there. And we've talked at length about one of the biggest issues obviously that's facing the LGBT community at the moment around transphobia, and challenges from the GC crowd as well. I was wondering what you thought the other big issues are that are facing the community at the moment. We've mentioned the cost of living crisis. We know that strikes are happening and many unions are balloting. The pandemic continues to rage. So what do you both see as being the biggest challenges facing the community currently? Mike, I'll come to you first for that one.
Well, it springs to mind is monkeypox. That is already being characterized as a disease of gay men. And you just think, excuse me a minute, haven't we been here before? Yes, 30, 35 years ago we were here. And yet the media are doing it all over again. It's as if HIV and AIDS never happened, so that one needs to be really nipped in the bud. And challenged every single time it comes up. Not only is it maligning the gay male community, but in terms of public health, it's appalling because it's really dangerous misinformation. People are going to end up getting ill because of that misinformation. So it's a disease and it needs to be dealt with as such. And naming communities is pointless, and again, it's just malicious.
Like Mike said, monkeypox is a big one, and in terms of history repeating itself with how it's being described and stuff like that. I think also in terms of equality to do with parenting, how like maternity gets so much, paternity gets so much, yet with same-sex couples, obviously they're not afforded the same sort of rights. So I think that is a big one that, affects the community in terms of trying to be on the same level as heterosexual couples, because at the end of the day, it's the same really. The only difference is the sex or gender of your partner, really. A baby still needs a parent to look after them, and the parents still deserve the right to be able to look after them with fair pay and fair conditions to do with that. So I think that's a big one. And I know that I'm trying to think who it is now, the LGBT cooperatives are doing a whole thing on that. I think it's in their manifesto. I think someone shared that with me a couple of days ago. But that's really interesting to look into. I've not managed to have a full look into it yet because of elections and stuff coming up. But I think that is a big thing to work towards, trying to get equality to do with parenting and, stuff like that, and adoption rights as well. So I think that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two really interesting choices for, the challenges that we're facing. I think even though they're both very different, what they demonstrate is that, the fight for LGBT rights is continuing on so many different levels, both in terms of countering prejudice in the instance Mike's talking about, and the misinformation that's spread through the media, and then in terms of legal rights as well. It's quite easy often for people of my generation and younger to think that battle has been won to a certain degree, that equal marriage perhaps kind of was a watershed that solved that, and it's gone away. That's quite a, I guess, a liberal view of looking at gay rights. And we've talked already about the work, solidarity between LGSM and the typical support that you received in that time. So why is it important today for socialists to continue supporting LGBT rights and the fight for them? Katherine, I'll come to you.
I think it's really important that we carry on because, as we've mentioned, the fight is not done. You know, we're not there yet. Granted, we've come a long way in the past 50, 60 years, but we're still not there. You know, places in the world don't have equality for gay people. Some countries still don't have gay marriage. So I think that's a big one for socialists in the UK and around the world, to show solidarity for campaigns in different countries so that LGBTQ plus members around the world can feel a bit more free, you know, because countries are at different levels. Granted, we're doing all right, but there is, like I say, still a way to go in terms of equality with, especially with trans people. You know, that is a big fight, which we've talked about, obviously, with the gender critical crowd. So I think it's important that we just carry on the fight, you know, that we continue educating people, because, you know, most of us can sympathise with someone going through a struggle in some sort of way, and trans people are really, really feeling it right now, you know, with the transphobia that we talked about in the media and British politics. And I think in terms of what we've discussed with like LGBT parenting and adoption and surrogacy and stuff like that, and how the media still treats LGBT people, with Mike going on about how, you know, monkeypox has been described. So I think it's really important that we excuse me, carry on, you know, preaching, for lack of a better word, and spreading the message so that people understand that although we've done a lot, we're still not there, and this is what we need to do to get further ahead so that, you know, we can have full queer liberation across not just the UK, but across the world eventually, which would be lovely. But like I said, there's still a long way to go. So yeah, I'm sure Mike will explain loads better than I have. I feel like I've just rambled again, but Mike's a lot more eloquent than I am.
Yeah, I mean, rights that you've won have to be constantly fought for because they can be taken away. And this government, only in the last few days, are starting to dismantle fundamental basic human rights and civil rights. You know, so there's a very good example of how your rights can be taken away. Take inflation growing the way it is. There's going to be more and more hardship, more and more strife. And those are the occasions when human rights tend to get trampled on. So we need to be really vigilant about that and keep our eye on the ball to make sure that, you know, we are defending our rights and asserting our rights as well. You know, as Katherine says, you know, we're still not there 100% with LGBT rights in Britain, but we've come an awful long way compared to when I was a young man, for example. And one of the jobs that we should be doing is looking overseas to other countries where they need, the LGBT plus communities need support. You know, it's still life imprisonment or even capital punishment in a few countries in the world, including Saudi Arabia. And so what we've gained ground in, we should use that as a platform to reach out and reach overseas to do what we can to help other people in those countries. Yeah. Thanks.
Mike, I've seen a really great photo of you in Cuba for the International Day Against Homophobia. I was just wondering if you could reflect a bit on that experience and you know, what the relationship is between that international solidarity and the fight for LGBT people.
Yeah. That was a most amazing experience. I went out to Cuba mainly for a holiday with my sister, but I used kind of my networks and went out during what they call their Idaho week, and went on the equivalent of their gay pride march, and ended up unbelievably sitting next to Mariella Castro in her limousine on the pride march. The love expressed for her was tangible. All these people on the march just were coming up and shouting her name and wanted to shake hands with her and take pictures of her, etc. And she, and particularly her mother, really pushed Fidel and Mariella's father, Raul Castro, on LGBT rights, because Cuba did not have a good record on LGBT rights, and neither did this country. And basically they persuaded them that it was wrong for them to be persecuting gay men. And in the end, Fidel Castro actually made a formal public apology to Cuba's LGBT community, saying what we did was wrong and we apologized for that. And so now there's been a kind of government organization about 15, 16 years now that's taken responsibility for LGBT issues and also women's issues as well, violence against women, birth controls, things like that. And it's a very good government department. It's brilliant. So, you know, good old Cuba, they've got this LGBT community now, you know, that's out and proud. And it was amazing being there.
Thanks, Mike. That's really great. And I wonder if we might be able to pop the picture up when we put this video up as well, because it is really good, joyful, colourful picture. I'm just a bit aware of time, and I feel like I've got so many questions, and we could just go on for another hour talking about this. But I'll just ask, I think, one last question, and then we'll wrap up. So what I'm interested in asking about is, obviously, in the miners' strike, what was important was that fight for coal, not dole, and Mike, I see your Orgreave shirt as well, and acknowledge the important fight that goes on around that. What I'm interested in asking you both your opinions on are, can we see any parallels between the fight for coal, not dole back in the 80s and the debate that's happening today in the climate movement around the fight for a just transition? You know, through a Green New Deal and the changes that we might be able to see in relation to industrial jobs there. I know that's quite a big question, and I've said I want to end, but I'll give you 5 minutes or something to this. I think it's a good one. So Mike, do you want to come in on that first, then Catherine, welcome to you for that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know so much about parallels. After all, Thatcher was closing the coal mines down. And Johnson tried to pass this off because she cared about the environment. What a load of toss that is. He was laughed out of court on that one. She was closing down the coal mines because her lie was that they were uneconomic. She did manage to close all the coal mines, and her successors did. But we still use coal in this country. We import it instead. British coal, when it was a nationalised industry, when Thatcher came to power, had the most developed science around the world in terms of carbon capture, what's so-called clean coal technology. And guess who closed down that research? Margaret Hilda Thatcher. Now, in retrospect, I'm not so sure whether carbon capture is an answer at all, really. I mean, we just need to stop extracting fossil fuels, and that's imperative, and it needs to be done very, very quickly. But you can't just throw people out of work. You've got to, you know, have a transition to find alternative jobs. So why not let's move them from extractive industries into the green industries? And if we had a government that cared about its citizens and society, that's what that government would be doing. But clearly we haven't. We've got a government that only cares about being self-serving, and feeding the billionaire class and keeping capitalism going. There's one economic system that cannot deal with climate change, and that's a capitalist economic system, because capitalism has to produce and produce and produce, and we have to consume and consume and consume. And that's anathema to tackling the climate crisis. It absolutely is. And it makes me smile, really, because capitalism is not the answer. I don't know if I've answered your question there at all, Amy, but I've had a rant.
Yeah, Mike, thanks. And Katherine, do you want to add anything to that or respond to Mike's point?
Oh, glad you've had your rant. It's given me time to think. I fear I'm just going to end up, this is just a whole thing. I'm just repeating Mike throughout this entire chat. Yeah, I mean, it's about, oh God, it's a really interesting question. And you've put me on the spot with this one, Amy. I think a big thing is to do with the government's just want for money. They always seem to, there's a pattern. In the 80s, they looked for, they wanted to get the money. It's profit over people, when it really should be people over profit at the end of the day. And like Mike said, they just wanted to throw all these people out of jobs, and they should be putting them from one industry into the clean energy industry, because if we really look into it, there's enough jobs to sort of to go for people if we really committed to actually looking at the science and going, well, this is how we can improve the country and stuff, and try and tackle global warming to an extent, because we've probably already done irreversible damage. I don't know how bad the extent is, but I mean, in terms of maybe slowing it down at least a little bit, by looking at the figures and stuff and going, right, really, if we look into this industry and sort of work with the science and the scientists, we can try and combat it, and we can put all these people into these jobs, not just tackling climate crisis, but also unemployment crisis, really. Mike's pretty much summed up what I was to a point what I was gonna say. I have no original thought on it other than that, but yeah, I think Mike's absolutely right.
Thanks, Katherine.
And if we'd have had Jeremy Corbyn in power December 2019, we would be well on the road to having a green energy policy and implementing that. And this whole debacle over the hiking fossil fuel prices that we're all having to pay through the nose for probably wouldn't even exist, because we wouldn't be so dependent on gas, oil and coal. There's the irony. There's absolutely no arguments in favour of extractive industries except one: profit. Yeah, and I'm sure that those people don't like the idea of green energy because there's not much profit to be made from it. They need their profits. It's like a drug fix for them.
Well, on that heavy note, whilst we're wrapping up, but I've got a couple of questions left just for you both that are more easier to answer, I think. So Mike, LGSM have recently had some archive materials from the campaign stored with the Bishopsgate Institute. How can people go see those if they want to? Can you just turn up? Do you need to book?
It's probably best to give them a ring first. I mean, they are open archives. It's fairly new, so they've done a rudimentary cataloguing of it. But yeah, I think I'd probably suggest giving them a quick ring to say, can you get that out for me? Yeah. And that archive, incidentally, it really has come about because of the movie coming out. So it tracks the development of the movie, because it was 3.5 years in development before it came out in September 2014. And so it's a record of our initial meetings and so forth, and then through the making of the movie, and then post-movie, and all the astonishing number of meetings that we've been invited to. mainly in Britain, but quite a lot of forays into Europe and even further afield as well.
Sounds fascinating, and I can't wait to go and have a look at it all. Katherine, so you're up for election shortly, so could you just remind us who is eligible to vote for you in Young Labour and how they can do that?
So if I'm correct, it's members who, I never get the age right, so forgive me. As long as you're a member of Young Labour, so I think that's 27 inclusive and under, so I think it's 14 to 27. You should receive an email from Labour ballots, and if you don't, then email them. I will find out what the email is because I always forget it because my brain is like a sieve. But yeah, it will take you to like the Labour nominations portal, forgive my tongue, and then you can go through, as long as you self-identify as LGBTQ plus or some part of the community, you're eligible to vote for your preferred candidate. Same with like BAME representatives and the women and the disabled members. But yeah, Labour ballots should email people with a link, and then it'll take you to the nominations portal and you'll be able to vote for whoever you want. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, really good luck with that. We'll be rooting for you. Unfortunately, I'm too old to vote, but good luck for that. And if people watching need to go and make sure they're registered as LGBTQ plus and identify themselves in that way, make sure you can vote for Katherine. So thank you both for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been so interesting. And the issues we've discussed are so important, and as we've noted, they continue to be important. I think Mike, you put it well when he said, you fight for your rights, but you continue to fight to keep them and protect them once they've been granted to you. And it is in no way guaranteed that they won't be taken away. And I think, building these movements, those strong coalitions, is such an important way that we can protect those hard-earned rights. So a Rise Festival exists to also try and develop these strong coalitions and the radical ideas within the Labour movement. And this is part of the Rise Online Festival, which is currently running until the 28th of July. But I'll do a bit of a plug now for the other excellent things we've got coming on. So the festival features loads of great events across the whole month. Some are live and some are recorded. So some examples of the live events are our Justice for the Global South meeting on the 8th of July. How Can the Left Win with James Schneider and Laura Smith on the 15th of July. And the Time to Speak Up for Palestine event on the 18th of July, which I'm chairing and would hope everyone would attend. So you can check out our website and Twitter for the full details, and also give our media partner Labour Outlook a follow whilst you're there. And please, if you can afford to, support Arise, so we continue to make excellent content that builds our movement. And the link to donate, if you can afford to do so, will be below this video on YouTube, and please contribute to that if you can. So thank you again, Mike and Katherine, for joining me today. And thank you to everyone for watching.